our first story, Behind Mansion Walls. He gave away a fortune.
There you go. You get it all back with interest.
Well over $20 million.
Then funded his own murder.
To be able to do that to somebody, unspeakable.
And later,
Oh, it's great to be here.
And they were going to go home and make love.
a romantic drive takes a horrifying turn.
There's no way anybody could have survived a crash like this.
I'm Christopher Mason. The well-off in this world are truly blessed. Beautiful cars, magnificent art collections, sprawling estates. But some of society's finest are addicted to wealth. And the only way to get another quick fix is to kill. Because having it all is never enough.
A millionaire businessman enjoys another successful lunch. Not making money, but spending it.
The greatest single contributor to charitable causes in Canada.
This tycoon donates a fortune to good causes. But even when you're saving the world, not everyone thinks you're a hero.
The gunman was lying in wait and ambushed him.
One of the downsides of being filthy rich is there's never enough time. All the black tie functions, glamorous cocktail parties. It's hard work making sure one is seen in all the right places. Unless, that is, you don't want to be seen.
Mr. Davis was a wonderful person. He was generous, he was kind, he was compassionate, he was caring.
What Canadian multimillionaire Glen Davis doesn't care for is the limousine lifestyle of the mega-rich.
We'll start here and trek down to the Lake of Two Rivers.
Sounds like a plan.
Rather than hobnobbing at gala events, he prefers hiking in the vast Canadian wilderness.
Glen Davis would regularly spend 3 months at a time up in the Yukon and Northwest Territories, northern region of Canada.
The 66-year-old and his wife have no children. Instead, he lavishes attention on his godson, 37-year-old Marshall Ross.
There was a close familial relationship between them.
Take a look.
Well, Mr. Davis and Marshall Ross were actually second cousins, but their relationship was very much big brother, little brother.
It's a
He always sort of looked out for Marshall when he was growing up, took Marshall on a number of outdoor adventures, took him skiing, introduced him to the wilderness up in Alaska, down to the Grand Canyon.
And I think he saw in Marshall kind of a young protege, someone he was trying to mentor.
Glen Davis wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he was given one soon after. As an infant, he was adopted by wealthy businessman Nelson Morgan Davis, who built an empire of more than 40 companies.
Everything from truck lines to car dealerships to property development management. N.M. Davis Corporation was worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
The Davis family was waited on hand and foot by servants in this sprawling 29-room Georgian-style mansion in East Toronto. Longtime Davis employee and family friend Keith Jones says Glen grew up in the lap of luxury.
Mr. Davis had a very privileged upbringing. Of course, he also went to private schools, so he had all the advantages that his father could afford for him at that time.
But it seems privilege and pain go hand in hand. Glen's life is plagued by trauma and tragedy. In 1969, his cousin Mary is kidnapped and held for ransom.
It turned out to be one of her former boyfriends. It was resolved. They arrested the people who kidnapped her. She was returned safely, and they got back all of the cash.
10 years later, his father Nelson drowns in his swimming pool. And in June 1983, an event that changes Glen's life forever.
Glen Davis was aboard an Air Canada flight. The cabin suddenly filled with smoke, and the plane was forced to make an emergency landing in Cincinnati, Ohio. When the plane landed on the tarmac, it burst into flames.
23 people die in the blaze. Glen Davis is among the handful of survivors. Many say that brush with death shifted Glen's focus from financial to philanthropic.
His philosophy in life really was, to whom much is given, much is expected.
He transformed himself from a businessman worried about acquiring and accumulating wealth to someone who was going to distribute wealth to help worthy causes. He donated well over $20 million.
One person to benefit from Glen Davis's largesse is Marshall Ross. In 2004, Glen agrees to bankroll his godson's new business venture.
Marshall Ross's business was the renovation business.
A good business plan, my boy. I like it.
His idea was to buy houses, renovate them, and flip them.
Glen has every confidence in his protege and kicks in a cool $2.5 million.
There you go. Here you get it all back with interest.
Mr. Davis was, in effect, Marshall Ross's banker.
With his intense love for the environment, Glen plunges most of his greenbacks into green causes.
I think we should preserve.
Mr. Davis really felt that we should be saving just millions and millions of acres of pristine wilderness for future generations.
As far as we're...
On May 18th, 2007, Glen meets a friend from a wildlife charity for lunch. On the menu, another chunk of the Davis fortune.
He attends the business meeting,
Just absolutely wonderful.
having lunch and talking over a donation that he was going to make for one of the environmental causes.
After lunch, in the underground parking, the millionaire has another rendezvous. Only this one is unexpected.
He fired the first shot into Glen Davis's chest. Glen Davis fell to his knees and was begging for his life.
No, please.
Please don't kill me. And then, of course, he was shot.
They tell us that there has been a shooting, and indeed, Mr. Davis has died. It's like it was yesterday, but it seems so long ago. You're stunned. You can't even begin to accept it. You're just stunned.
Once the terrible news is sunk in, the family is certain they know who's responsible.
We thought it was anti-environment people. Because Mr. Davis, of course, was very instrumental in getting land saved up in the Yukon and Alaska and the Arctic so that they wouldn't be exploited by mining and oil drilling and things like that.
No, please.
Have Glen's efforts to save Canada's wilderness cost him his life?
Typical, isn't it? You give away millions of dollars to help protect the environment. What is your reward? You get shot down in cold blood. Was Glen Davis killed by a rabid anti-environmentalist?
His family certainly thinks so. Glen dedicated his life to protecting resource-rich land like the Yukon. Was a rogue land corporation so desperate to develop a slice of this valuable wilderness, it gunned down its greatest savior? As Toronto police seek out leads, the mild-mannered millionaire is mourned by devastated family and friends. Wearing his godfather's favorite hiking hat, an emotional Marshall Ross delivers a heartfelt eulogy.
Not only our family, the whole country has lost a wonderful man.
And lays his benefactor to rest.
Marshall, being the godson, Mrs. Davis had asked him if he would place Mr. Davis in the ground.
Investigators identify one suspect within the Davis family.
Michael Schell was Glen Davis's nephew.
Schell had waged a bitter court battle with his uncle.
Michael Schell sued Glen Davis because he believed that his mother's share of the estate should have been much bigger. And in turn, he should benefit to a much greater extent than he already did for Nelson Morgan Davis's death.
Just 3 months before the shooting, Michael Schell's lawsuit was thrown out of court. Could that have provoked him to murder?
Michael Schell had become a person of interest to our investigation. And the more we looked into him, the more we were able to satisfy ourselves that he didn't have the means, the knowledge, nor was he present in Toronto at the time of the murder. And he was quickly eliminated as a suspect in our investigation.
Well, what's interesting to note is that Michael Schell's lawyer sent his bill to Mr. Davis because Michael was destitute. He couldn't pay the bill, and Mr. Davis paid the bill. That's the kind of guy he was. Just, you know, let it go. Just let it go.
Detectives soon discover this isn't the first mysterious attack on the millionaire. On December 21st, 2005, outside his office in Midtown Toronto, Glen Davis is the victim of a brutal beating.
And Mr. Davis was yelling at him, "What do you want? What do you want?" But he just kept beating him with the baseball bat.
It's over as quickly as it started. The assailant suddenly flees.
Mr. Davis is laying there. Blood. You can't believe the blood. There was over 100 stitches to his head. His arm was busted in 4 places. They had to put steel pins and plates in his arm. But that's what saved his life, actually, being able to protect his head.
Was that attack part of a scare campaign staged by extremists in the Anti-Environment Brigade? If so, the beating and Glen's shooting could be linked. 5 days after Glen Davis's murder, a possible breakthrough. Security camera footage shows a mystery man prowling the parking structure.
Shortly after Glen Davis was shot, this male was seen exiting the underground parking lot.
Is this the gunman? Toronto police released the footage, hoping someone will identify the suspect.
Despite numerous appeals to the public for the identity of the suspect, no new leads come into the investigative team.
Weeks turn into months. For Detective Sergeant Peter Morera and his team, frustration builds as the investigation goes cold.
I've never looked into somebody's background as closely as we looked into Glen Davis. There was nothing at all that would, again, suggest or explain why Glen Davis was targeted in the underground parking lot.
18 months pass. Then, in November 2008, a major turning point. Police arrest a small-time crook for robbery. Hoping to cut a deal, the criminal offers the cops some information and blows the Glen Davis murder case wide open.
He tells me that he was hired by a man to kill Glen Davis.
The snitch claims he was offered $150,000 to murder the millionaire back in December 2005. He hired another lowlife to do the dirty work. But good help is hard to find. His man didn't finish the job.
He was supposed to die that day. Mr. Davis was supposed to die that day from that beating.
The informant tells cops he was hired by Russian construction worker Dmitry Kosirin. He also identifies the suspect captured in the CCTV video. Kosirin's right-hand man, Yevgeny Vorobyov, also known as Eugene.
As a result of the information that he had provided us, we were able to link Dmitry Kosirin to the attack in 2005. There was a very clear connection between Dmitry Kosirin and Evgeny Vorobyov.
Is the Russian mafia targeting this multimillionaire?
The investigation never revealed any connections between Dmitry Kosirin, Evgeny Vorobyov, or really anyone involved in the investigation to any organized crime ties.
So why kill a man they'd never met? Unless they're hired guns. Were the Russians paid by anti-green extremists to gun down Glen Davis?
The Russians they're basically contractors for someone else who's going to profit, who he thinks he's going to profit from Glen Davis's murder.
In early 2009, police wiretapped the Russians' phones and bugged their vehicles. They eavesdrop on a damning conversation between Dmitry Kosirin and someone who seems to know a surprising amount about the murder plot.
There's one telling intercept that occurs where they discuss and outline everyone's role in the murder on the day of the murder and what was done. It was as a result of that conversation that we're ultimately able to identify and confirm who the person of interest was.
The cops can hardly believe it when they identify the owner of the voice. Nearly 2 years after millionaire philanthropist Glen Davis is gunned down, a secretly taped conversation reveals the mastermind behind the murder. Davis's cousin and trusted godson, Marshall Ross.
We're fine. You sure about that? Positive.
During that conversation, Marshall Ross and Dmitry Kosirin talk about the video surveillance, about the timestamps. Dmitry Kosirin suggests, well, that's not evidence, that's not proof.
They don't know who he is.
And Marshall says, well, no, but they put it together with the other evidence. And as a result of that, Marshall Ross and Dmitry Kosirin discuss what everybody's role is. And Marshall Ross is kind enough to review the sequence of events.
We're good.
In February 2009, police arrest Marshall Ross and charge him with first-degree murder.
They came in, and I'm standing there, and they tell me that Marshall Ross has been arrested for the first-degree murder of Glen Davis. What? What did you say? Marshall Ross? And they said, he didn't pull the trigger, but he was into it up to here.
Overnight, the close-knit Davis family goes into meltdown.
Marshall's family refused to believe it.
Hey, good businessman, my boy.
And it does seem unbelievable.
I like it.
Why kill the person who's given you millions of dollars? But Glen's generous loan was not enough for Marshall Ross.
The loan started in 2004, and almost immediately, Marshall began to run into financial problems. He seemed to be losing money hand over fist.
Instead of paying off the loan, Marshall squanders the money on an extravagant lifestyle.
Marshall Ross was a guy who had no wealth, who wanted to flash it around, to portray to people that he was extremely successful and wealthy, and dug himself a bigger and bigger hole in his life, trying to maintain the lie, the facade of success.
When Marshall was in his deepest financial crisis, he took a month's trip to Italy and rented 2 villas and cars and brought back cases of wine. all Glen Davis's money.
Marshall can't face up to his failure, so he hides his massive debt.
Marshall Ross was so indebted to Glen Davis that he had no reasonable prospects of ever paying that money back.
You want to grab a bite?
Oh, I can't. I got too much going on.
Everything okay?
Yeah, it's great.
If he had come to Mr. Davis and said to him, you know, Uncle Glenn, I've mucked this business up. I'm deep in debt, and I don't know how to get out of it.
Good. Good to hear it.
Mr. Davis would have given him a lecture, which was his want, and they would have said, okay, how can we solve this? Because that's the kind of guy Mr. Davis was.
Drowning in debt, he watched his godfather give away a fortune and seethed with rage, believing charity should begin and end at his home.
Marshall Ross had a sense of entitlement. He believed that his side of the family was more entitled to Nelson Davis's fortune than Glen Davis was.
About a photo?
Oh, sure, boy, sure.
Simply because Glen Davis was adopted, and he felt that his family were the rightful heirs of the company and the fortune.
Finally, he could stand it no longer. Marshall had to get his hands on that money before it was all gone. For that to happen, Glen Davis had to die.
He wanted Glen Davis murdered. He hired people to murder Glen Davis, that he was involved in the 2005 incident, and that he was involved in the 2007 incident.
On both occasions, he turned to his business associate, Dmitry Kosirin.
I don't want to know how, when, or where.
Marshall Ross
I just want the job done right this time.
hired Dmitry as the middleman to find someone to kill his uncle. And he supplied Dmitry with all of the logistics.
After the bungled 2005 attack, the Russians make sure this time Marshall's plan is properly executed.
Glen Davis, after being shot the first time, was begging for his life and had actually fallen to his knees
No, please, please.
before he fired the second and fatal shot.
Don't kill me.
In the ultimate betrayal, Marshall Ross paid for the hit with his godfather's money.
Glen Davis funded his own murder.
Dmitry Kosirin and Evgeny Vorobyov are found guilty of murder in the first degree and given life sentences. In 2011, Marshall Ross pleads guilty to murder and receives Canada's maximum sentence, life in prison.
Glen Davis loved Marshall Ross. He was his favorite relative. Glen Davis did everything for Marshall Ross to succeed. It took 21 months to solve this case because of that, because it's a betrayal on a level that's rarely seen.
A week after arranging the murder, Marshall Ross has the gall to star at his godfather's funeral.
Over the past 40 years.
When you look back and you see how he acted, putting the Tilly hat on, emceeing this reception that we were having, putting Mr. Davis into the ground, all the time knowing that he had caused Mr. Davis's murder. It's just, you can't even imagine someone could do that. So a huge betrayal of everyone's trust involved.
Marshall Ross assumed he would inherit Glen Davis's fortune. There was just one problem. When the will was read, Marshall wasn't in it. Ever the philanthropist, Glen Davis left his entire fortune to charity. Just goes to show, even for the most privileged, the best laid plans can quickly plunge into chaos.
In the middle of the night, on the side of a cliff,
Please hurry!
a desperate man
I'm hanging on the edge of a cliff.
makes a frantic emergency call.
Help! I'm on the edge of a cliff.
They had a hysterical male on the other end of the phone saying he'd gone over the cliff and didn't know where he was.
Help me, please.
But he's not the only one who's gone over the edge.
My wife was in the truck.
It's a dramatic plea for help. I'm stuck here on the side of this cliff. Please come and help me. My wife is somewhere down there. I don't know what happened to her.
Oh, God.
Nestled on the shores of Lake Tahoe, Incline Village is one of the most exclusive hamlets in the U.S.
It is breathtakingly beautiful. It's a very affluent community.
Its residents are rock stars, business giants. Basically, you don't live in this neck of the woods unless you've made it.
Actually, billionaires with a B. I can think of probably 10 well-known celebrities that live in that area.
Peter and Renette Bergna might not be famous, but they're certainly rich. And like others in Incline, inclined toward the finer things in life.
It's a perfect blend of fruit, acid, and tannin.
Renette and Peter were wealthy, but they were not ostentatious. Peter did like showing off his wine and his art, but it was always more that he was proud of the collection, not trying to flaunt his wealth.
The son of a prominent and wealthy California attorney, 45-year-old Peter makes big money as an art appraiser for a high-end auction house.
Peter was that guy you see on the Antiques Roadshow who can look at an old work, artwork, a piece of furniture or whatever, and come up with a valuation.
But his most valuable acquisition would have to be his wife, Renette, a self-made woman, earning a small fortune as a pharmaceutical consultant.
She kind of built up her own little business as a pharmacist. She was a freelance pharmacist, and she worked at a couple of different hospitals. And, you know, her earning potential was very high, and she could have made almost as much money as she wanted.
But Renette isn't driven by money. And in 1997, the 49-year-old suddenly announces a career change.
No! Can you believe it? Oh, I hate you. I'm so jealous.
She's giving up her lucrative job to become a tour guide.
Renetta wanted to change careers, and with that change of careers meant more time away from home, but yet it was something that she really wanted to do.
Touring all the way down through Rome.
Even though ditching the pills and prescriptions means taking a massive pay cut. And in the spring of 1998, Renette leads her first major tour, a 6-week trip to her spiritual homeland, Italy.
She's from an Italian family, and she spoke Italian. And so even though she was inexperienced, the tour company took a chance on her, and she went to Italy for several weeks, leaving Peter behind.
Renette has never been happier, but she will never see her home again.
When you're rolling in money, you can afford to indulge the odd whim. Wealthy Renette Bergna threw away her lucrative career to work as a tour guide. Now she's just returned from 6 weeks in Italy, and husband Peter wants her homecoming to be unforgettable. And so it will be.
Peter picked Renette up at the airport. They decided to take a romantic drive up the side of the mountain to this place where they could look over the valley of Nevada and see the lights twinkling below them.
Oh, it's great to be here.
He was trying to get her in the mood, and they were going to go home and make love after they had this romantic drive on the side of the mountain.
But the happy homecoming suddenly takes a turn for the worse.
Slow down! Slow down!
He drives down the hill, and he loses control of the truck. He's braking, the brakes don't work. The truck crashes into a guardrail. Peter somehow gets thrown from the truck.
first impact for the vehicle was about 104 feet. Then it tumbled approximately 700 more feet. End over end, side over side, but literally vehicle tumbling with Mrs. Bergner still inside.
There is no way anybody could have survived a crash like this. The truck plunging through a guardrail, hurtling hundreds of feet down a cliff, landing upside down. It is just devastating. Renette suffered horrific injuries. Brain trauma, bleeding in the head, broken ribs, broken neck. Her body was essentially mangled.
By dawn, Reno police are at the crash scene. When Detective James Beltran arrives, it's what he doesn't see that puzzles him.
The thing that got me first was it was a freshly paved highway, and there was no scuff, skid, gouge, fluid deposit, anything like that that would lead you to believe that there was any kind of braking or steering. There was no marks on the roadway at all. If there was a catastrophic failure of the master cylinder or your brakes, there would be some deposit of fluid most likely. Or if there was turning or speed involved, there would be yaw, scuff, skid. There was none of that.
Other things don't add up.
Early on, police suspected that he had to have been driving fast to crash through this guardrail. 40, 50, 60 miles per hour.
If Peter Bergner was thrown from a vehicle going that fast, he'd be lucky to be alive. But when he returns to the crash scene later that day, it seems he's escaped with barely a scratch.
He was basically uninjured other than he had a twisted ankle. He had dirt on the back side of his pants, and his hands and face were unremarkable, not injured or scuffed.
When police examine the twisted guardrail, the mystery deepens.
It looked like things had been kind of loosened on the guardrail, that there weren't as many bolts through the actual railing, and that the post itself probably was not embedded completely and solidly into the ground.
Who removed those bolts? Was it Peter Bergner? Was all this part of an elaborate plan to kill his wife? For cops, it seems just too far-fetched.
This required Peter to, even going 15 or 20 miles per hour, jump out of a truck at the very last second before his wife plunged to her death.
Then detectives discover a far more innocent explanation. Hang gliders, hankering for a clear runway.
I believe that was done by the people that hang glide in that area.
Peter's story does check out. With the guardrail so loose, he wouldn't have to be traveling fast to go through it. Which explains why he's not severely injured.
As cops investigated, they realized he could have been driving as slowly as 20 miles per hour to crash through, which is how fast he said he was driving.
Peter Bergner was adamant. The brakes just failed.
I was hitting the brake, I was hitting the brake, I was hitting the brake, and it wasn't stopping.
Peter is left to pick up the pieces of his life. The wealthy widower seeks solace in spending.
He buys boats, he buys more antiques. He goes back to living pretty much the kind of life he was leading before she died.
Reno police continue probing the accident and discover the Bergner's champagne marriage had lost much of its fizz.
Peter and Renette seemed to have everything, but when police started talking to friends and family, it turns out this was a deeply troubled marriage. And there were two major issues. One, Peter wanted children, Renette did not. Two, Peter wanted Renette home all the time. Renette wanted to be a tour guide and was going to be gone for weeks, if not months on end.
You know I'm going to Pompeii.
Peter admitted in his first police interviews that he was desperately lonely.
I want her home with me. That's why I got married. And not be married to be alone.
He was, in his words, lonely because they didn't have kids, and when she wasn't there, he would sit at home and do nothing. But we'd later find out that wasn't necessarily true.
Yes, red is my favorite.
In fact, while Renette was overseas, the art dealer was casting an eye over some exquisite pieces.
This particular red is perfect.
He seemed to be hitting on women in the Reno and Lake Tahoe area.
But is being lonely enough motive to hatch such a perilous murder plot? Investigators delve into the Bergnas' finances and find Renette's death makes her rich husband even richer. Not only does he pocket a life insurance payout worth nearly $500,000, he also receives another big bonus, inheriting a slice of Renette's vast family fortune.
Renette came from a very old and established ranching family in Northern California. They owned hundreds of acres south of Sacramento. If you were to sell that, it would be worth millions.
And when detectives read the terms of the inheritance, they discover an intriguing catch.
For Peter to get a piece of Renette's family fortune, she had to die.
Peter Bergna knows the value of a rare antique. He also knows exactly what his wife's life was worth.
Peter stood to inherit hundreds of thousands of dollars from Renette and her family, but only if she died. If they divorced, because of the way the inheritance and the contract was written up, he would get nothing.
Where there's money, there's a motive. Cops start to suspect Peter Bergna did stage the crash to murder Renette. But it seems almost too incredible to believe. If you want to kill someone, there are much easier ways than driving off a cliff.
This meant that Peter Bergna risked his own life, really risked his own life, just to get rid of his wife.
Investigators start to build the case against him.
It took a long time. It took a lot of accident reconstruction. It took months and months and months for police to build this case against Peter.
First, there's his cap, found abandoned on the road.
Police were curious about Peter's ball cap. It wasn't on the side of the cliff. It seems like if he got thrown from the car, as he claimed, this thing should have tumbled down the hill, but it was just there.
A search of the wreck finds 2 cans of gasoline in the back of the truck, had their sealer caps removed.
That means that Peter allegedly had put 2 essentially open gas cans in the back of the truck, making them wonder, did he plan for this truck to explode into flames?
A lot of people see movies where the car will go over a cliff and suddenly explode. Well, that's a movie magic effect. He thought it'd take fire and then further reduce any evidence. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it didn't start up.
When forensics experts examine the clothes Peter was wearing the night of the accident, they find mysterious dark marks.
We had that tested, and it was asphalt. So that means he left on the roadway, out of the vehicle, prior to hitting the guardrail.
Peter also admits he went to the crash site just before the accident, and not to go hang gliding.
Peter had been to the scene just the day before, and prosecutors said that he knew the guardrail was not secure. So clearly he could have known that the guardrail had been loosened, that the post was not secure, that the truck would relatively easily crash through.
Perhaps most telling of all, forensic mechanics find the truck's brakes and steering were in perfect working order. In November 2000, more than 2 years after the crash, Peter Bergner is arrested and charged with Renette's murder.
It was simple greed.
So what really happened on the mountain around midnight that night? Police say before leaving for the airport, Peter dressed in thick clothes to protect himself, but not from the cold.
Prosecutors theorize that he did this to protect himself when he jumped out of the truck and slid down the hill.
Placing the open gas cans in the back, he picks up Renette from the airport and heads up the mountain. Not, as he claimed, for a romantic interlude, but a bitter showdown.
In Peter's pocket after the accident, police found this list.
What's this?
It's a list of things I need you to do if you really want to save this marriage.
It was like a numerical list of all the things that had to be done to improve their marriage.
You've got to be kidding.
I'm serious.
More sex,
I'm not waiting around.
spend more time with each other. It was like talking points. He went up that hill, apparently with a very clear agenda, and that was improve this marriage or else.
If he didn't get the answers he wanted that night, he was going to end it.
When Renette won't bend to his will, Peter puts his diabolical plan into action.
Slow down!
Swerving to aim straight at the broken guardrail. A moment before impact, he leaps out, abandoning Renette to her fate.
Not only was Peter Bergner angry, desperate, perhaps greedy, but in a perverse way, he was very brave. Because this was a difficult crime to pull off. This required Peter to, even going 15 or 20 miles per hour, jump out of a truck at the very last second before his wife plunged to her death. What must she have thought at the moment that her husband bailed out and left her to die? Peter then scurries down the hill a little bit, clings to a branch, and calls 911 from his cell phone.
And Peter Bergner's bizarre behavior after the crash rings alarm bells for the Reno cops.
Several hours after the crash, to the shock of the officers there, Peter returns to the scene. He's already been at the hospital. He's been through this horrific accident.
Officer, Officer Beltram.
Hi, Peter.
Hey.
A friend drives him there. He gets out of the car, and what does he ask for? His man bag, this pouch that has some of his stuff in it.
Did you guys find my my fanny pack?
And the officers are amazed.
fanny pack?
His wife has just been killed, and he's worried about his gear. Why is he back here?
Yeah, we'll get to that.
It's really important I get it.
It was one of the first signs that something suspicious was going on.
He said absolutely nothing about how is my wife, where is my wife, what's her status. He was more interested in the bag.
Yeah, it's just down in probably.
I mean, that's not a grieving husband or anybody that has any sense of remorse.
Have any of you guys found it?
Detective James Beltran doesn't buy the distraught husband act either.
He went through all the motion of crying, and carrying on as if he was distraught.
There's no way I'd ever kill my wife for no reason whatsoever. I don't care. I don't care.
The huffing, the hyperventilation, and the actual chopping of his words to make it look like he was actually being emotional. The problem was that he never had a tear one, or his nose didn't run. There was Kleenex on the table right in front of him, and he never reached for it.
Help! I'm on the edge of a cliff!
Peter Bergner stands trial for his wife's murder in October 2001, more than 3 years after her horrible death. He still maintains it was a tragic accident, and some jurors agree.
It was 9-3, and the 3 holdouts just would not budge on it.
The judge declares a mistrial. But determined to nail their man, Reno police push for a retrial 6 months later. The cocky art collector thinks he can beat the rap again.
Peter's biggest enemy in all this was himself. Peter is arrogant. He doesn't seem to have any remorse. He doesn't seem to have any sadness. To the jury, he acted like a guilty man.
This time, Peter Bergner is found guilty of first-degree murder. The only spending he'll do now is spending life behind bars. Peter Bergner's overwhelming greed destroyed one life and left others, like seasoned cop James Beltran, with permanent scars.
Well, it was my last case, and to this day, I still take flowers to the crash site. So that means quite a bit to the satisfaction for her and for her family.
When greed takes hold, it can overpower even the wealthiest of men. Marshall Ross killed the generous godfather who'd set him up for life. And Peter Bergner sacrificed his loving wife on the altar of avarice. They should have been counting their blessings, but it was never enough. Till next time we meet, behind mansion walls, I'm Christopher Mason.